everyone. We are really grateful that you could join us today. We have an international crew, so I really am very grateful that you made time in literally whatever part of whatever day you are experiencing at this very moment to spend about 90 minutes with us. So on behalf of the koha-US Education Committee, welcome. We've been working on this panel for over the last few months and are very glad that today is finally the day. So we are, Lauren Denny and I are co-chairs of the Education Committee. She is here. Thank you, Lauren. We also have with us Fred King, Jason Robb, Wally, who may or may not actually be here today, but thank him if you see him. David Nind, Heather Hernandez, and Christopher Brannon, whose idea it actually was to have this panel. So thank you to him for speaking up with that great idea. Did I miss anybody? No. Okay. Our meetings of the Education Committee are open to everyone. You are welcome to join us. We meet on the fourth Monday of each month at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm sorry, I can't do the math at the moment. You can check the koha-US website for the Zoom link. It's in the calendar. We have a lot of projects in our queue after this program concludes. So there's plenty of work. It's a really congenial group. If you have an idea that you'd like to work on and would just like the platform to work on it, that's pretty much what we're there for. So big projects, little projects, lots to go around. So we have a few housekeeping items. We are scheduled for 90 minutes. So the first hour or so will be a moderated discussion. It's based on questions that we drew from a survey that you probably saw go around a couple of months ago. So we drew those from the Koha community. And they are going to be, it's a moderated discussion. So once Bob shows up, it's a moderated discussion. So he will be leading our developers through those questions. And then a little around the 1 hour mark, we're going to have them ask our users, end users, sysadmins, the audience, they're going to ask you questions. And then we're going to switch to more of an open format Q&A where our audience who maybe didn't see their question answered or who thought of a new one right now can add it in. During the moderated portion of today, we ask you to kindly stay muted. If you have an immediate question related to the current topic, please type it into the chat. You could also use the raise your hand option that's in the reactions menu. I think you have reactions. If you have reactions, yes. Raise your hand, and it's possible that we'll interject and have you ask your question, but maybe not. We will see how that goes. It all depends on how the conversation shapes itself. Let's see, but please wait until you're called on before you unmute yourself. So we have a few committee members monitoring the chat. If you have a question they can answer, they will be thrilled to help you out. They're looking for entertainment, so ask them easy ones. As you think of questions for this panel today, and this is an important thing to think about, keep in mind that today's discussion is really about the process of development and the process of working through bugs. We envisioned it as a chance for users to get to know real developers who actually get paid to do this work rather than these magical little elves who work in the background. So we want you to be able to ask general questions about the process and about their work. So the moderator will steer us away from specific bugs and instructions on how to use Koha as it exists today. So instead of that, he'll keep us focused on that process. I'm sure specific issues and bugs will come up as illustrations of a process, but we'll keep it at a kind of 1,000-foot level. As you can see in the title slide, we are most interested in how we can move Koha forward together. This will be recorded. It is already being recorded, and that recording will be available at some point. Can't make promises for other people who are doing the work. Will be available on the koha-US YouTube channel. Okay. Bob is here. You made my day, Bob. Okay. Are you all settled?
Yeah, ready to go.
Awesome. So I'm sharing my slides. If we could switch to yours if that's convenient for
You could
you?
just advance them. I think
Just
that's
advance
fine.
them? Okay.
Yeah.
Um, mm, okay. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Bob Benhoff. He is the Aspen Cat Services Manager at CLIC, which is the Colorado Library Consortium, and he's also a past president of koha-US. Sorry, Bob, that's all I know.
That's all right.
And we're really grateful that he stepped in on relatively short notice to moderate the discussion. So this is a very, very welcome service you're providing. Um, Let me go. Okay, hopefully underneath all of my chat and poll and stuff, are you looking at a list of the panelists? Yes, yay. Okay. So let's introduce our panelists. First, we have Owen Leonard, who is a web developer for the Athens County Public Libraries. And no, that is not Georgia, that is Ohio, in the wonderful land of where libraries are very well taken care of in the US. Lizette Shear is a developer at Bywater Solutions. I suppose, yeah, if you wave when I introduce you. Paul Derscheid is a software engineer at LMS Cloud. He is based in Germany. Lizette is on the west coast of the US. And Martin Renvoys is, I had it written down. He's the head of development at PTFS Europe. And where are you based, Martin?
I'm in sunny Hertfordshire in the UK, so just north of
Yay,
London.
there you go. Sunny Hertfordshire. And Alex Buckley is a general developer and project manager at Catalyst, and he is based in New Zealand. Okay, thank you all for being here, and thank you for being willing to contribute your time as well to the program. And I'll hand it over to Bob.
All right. So, first of all, I want to thank the panelists for giving their time and say that it's good to see those of you that I've met and then a couple of you that I haven't. It's nice. It'll be nice to hear from you. But let's go ahead and start with our first question. The way we've structured this is we're kind of grouping a bunch of questions so you can kind of address some of these bullet points, all or some of them. But the first kind of topic to bring up is what gets you excited about developing in Koha. You may want to touch on the next fun project you have, discussing developments that are funded requests versus developments that are worked on because the product needs it. And then some coming soon items in soon releases that you're excited about. So I will let whoever is excited to talk first just jump right in.
Um, for me, I think I really enjoy what gets me excited is modernizing some of the code base with the so I've been around Koa for a, nearly 2 decades. Probably shouldn't admit that. So I've seen some of the older code, and I'm enjoying bringing it up to sort of more modern standards so that we can attract newer, younger devs. So the PTFS team, we've onboarded 7 new devs in the last couple of years, and one of the outstanding kind of pieces that I've heard feedback from them is that quite a lot of our code is a little bit dated. So having some more modern things in there is attracting those younger bloods who are more into modern JavaScript and looking at some of the better or more modern types of Perl we're doing. That's kind of one of the things that excites me next projects. I can come up with some more, but I don't want to hog the floor. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there.
Yeah,
We could go back.
the modernization is something that's also exciting to me, especially with some of the display things, like the Bootstrap update that Owen did, which is opening the door for like theming options. Um, because Bootstrap has that built in the version we're on now, so we have like the framework to do theming changes if that's something we're interested in, and there's some like bug discussions about that. Also the continuing uh, expansion of the API to be able to do more like interconnected things with other products like Aspen Discovery and ILL modules, so that we can make things like more seamless in Koha, even when we're connecting with other products. But also just like the modernization. The one thing that I get a lot of joy out of seeing is improvements to multi-library systems, because I worked for 7 years at a consortium before I joined Bywater. And so getting to see things like one of the things we're working on is local holds priority group by group. So that we can do like by branch and then by group optionally and then by just everybody. And like not having that feature is why my library didn't use it. And so being able to like see things, oh, sorry, my Zoom got real weird for a second there. See things changing, that were like pain points for me on the library side is always exciting to me also.
I think you hit the nail right on the head there, simplifying and modernizing. I love trying to expose more features and more options for end users. So um, an example of that, I've really enjoyed digging in on the notices and notice templates system in Koa. I think there's still a lot of work to be done there, but that's a series of bugs I've picked up sort of beyond my work time and outside because I enjoy the fact that I know that there's people interested in it. I know it's going to make a difference to some librarians if they can write their templates more simply, if they can see existing notices in the queue a bit more clearly, things like that. So those are exciting to me. Having librarians get excited and go, "Oh, that's so cool!" That's a positive.
My situation is a little different because I don't work for a support company. I just work for a public library. Um, and most of the work, almost all of the work that I do is self-selected. I get to pick what I want to work on. Um, I get to just look for things that I think we could do better. And mostly that's front end stuff. And yeah, like I worked on the Bootstrap upgrade. That was a sort of like maybe once or twice a year I might take on some kind of giant project like that. Um, but the rest of the time I'm just looking for things that I think we could make look better or work better or something like that. Um, and I just keep my eyes open. Like I just look around for what interests me, and I feel really lucky to be able to work that way.
I don't want to barge in if Alex wants to say something. Well, for me, it's the inverse. I do not get to pick what I work on. I get told what to work on. And there's a lot to unpack in that question. What gets you excited about developing in Koa? Koa itself, to me, is a living piece of history because it's 25 years old almost. And you really see in some parts of Koa this age because there are some aspects that are still handled the same way that have been handled the same way for ages. I don't even know. Would need to check Git blame, but it's 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 such an all-encompassing giant code base that handles so many edge cases that pop up all around the world, and I think if you want to learn how to do software engineering, this is a good project to, yeah, well, be involved in. And the community is also awesome. I really enjoy all the people I've met during my time in the community, yeah. And I only started 3 years ago, and I had knew a little JavaScript, and now I'm a release maintainer, so it's also interesting path. Ah, what gets me excited? What I would agree that modernizing certain parts of the code and simplifying things that were complicated before, that's very enjoyable. So I couldn't agree more, but I also I also really enjoy if what Martin, or I also think what Martin said is really um it's just true. If you can give libraries more options to make Koha their own, that's also something I cannot focus on, but I would if I could.
See,
So, Paul,
I'd
can I
argue
ask?
that go on.
I was just going to ask Paul a quick follow up on. You said you're directed to do things. Is that from your customers, or is your organization deciding what priorities are?
Well, I think it's the same as for PDFS. You get funding for a specific thing, and you need to derive as much value for the community as you can through that process. And we all need to do it that way. But sometimes I haven't been involved in that many community projects. I have been working on bookings a lot in the last cycle, which I really enjoyed because Martin's an awesome colleague. And yeah.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Martin.
You kind of preempted me. I was just going to say that whilst there's lots of paid developments, a lot of those certainly we encourage our teams to go out and talk to the librarians that are funding them and asking them. So it might be a funded project, but it's usually been funded because someone's passionate about it and has gone to their director and said, "We really want to do this. Can we have some money, please, to give to these developers to do?" So part of the fun is actually coming up with the specifications and working through, well, what do you actually need, what do you want, and how can we deliver it. So if you're not getting out in front of the customer and asking those questions, Paul, we should have a word with your boss. That's half the fun.
I think he does a good job. Maybe I'm portraying it wrong.
Bro.
Yeah, so from my perspective, what gets you excited about developing in Koha? I think to touch on what you said, Martin, hearing that feedback from the end users is so fantastic. So for us, if we write a new feature or enhancement or bug fix, to hear people find it useful and helpful and to hear how they're using it is hugely motivating because we're in software development and we love interacting with the Koha community for the people, for trying to make the lives of librarians easier. And so to hear actually how that software is being used or the changes you've made are making a difference to someone's life, that's hugely motivating. I think we work across a few different collection open source systems. So one of them is called Viewfind, which is a open source discovery platform and something that we've really enjoyed seeing, like you mentioned earlier, Lizette, is about the Koha becoming be able to be more interconnected with other systems. So more API endpoints being added to Koha so that other systems can interconnect. So that's really helped with things like Viewfind, more API endpoints, so that interconnectivity between Viewfind and Koha is much better now. Something else that we really like, as people have touched on, is making Koha being able to get more granularly configurable by libraries. So a feature I really like that got me really excited recently was the ability to add different CSS and JavaScript for different library branches, because here in New Zealand we have several different customers that there might be a collection of different organizations that all share a singular Koha instance, but each organization's opaque. They want to have that different styling as well as different actual content. They want different styling, different style sheets, and all sorts of things like that. So making that really easy for librarians to be able to edit all of that themselves rather than having to come and ask us to do that. Just about empowering those end users to make as many changes as possible themselves is something that we really love to see.
Yeah, that really speaks to me because the organization I represent has all sorts of library types that use Koha completely differently. So they need those type of functionality to for our system to work. Well, I started out with positive stuff, but I did want to move to our next slide and ask our second question. What are the major holdups for developments? You can address blockers in the Koha community, likes, dislikes about the QA process, developments you want to work on but aren't prioritized or funded, and dealing with new features that come out and have a lot of bugs or aren't fully realized. So I'll turn that over to all of you again, whomever wants to dig into the negative side of things, or the stuff, let's say the things that could use some improvement, not negative.
A lot of the code is still old or confusing. You know, we've been doing a lot to modernize it, but as someone who's newer to the development side of it, definitely like I'm working on that holds group that I was talking about earlier, and the holds code is a lot. There's a lot going on in there. I know that Nick worked on a lot of it, and he talks about that like every time he needs to work on it, he needs to go read through the entire thing because it's so confusing, and like he wrote a bunch of it. And so the parts that aren't as modernized yet, that we haven't got that update on, can be daunting.
Yeah, Nick didn't enjoy my attempt to make holds even more complicated. I think he was like, I don't think it needs to be any more complicated than it currently is.
I think holds are a good example of code that I think developers are afraid to touch because it's so mission critical. It's so full of particular conditions and you know special exceptions and things like that. And it can be hard to take on something like that when you know a library is not going to say, "Hey, can you please rewrite all the holds code? Here's you know thousands of dollars to fund all this." You know, it would take a it's an example of one of those things in Koha where to take that on, we would need more concerted efforts at cooperation among all the development folks than we can usually muster. Like there's a lot of the cooperation we do is voluntary because each you know support company is their own thing. They're trying to serve their own customers. It means that working together to develop a feature may not be a priority because there's other priorities that come first. Um, and that's you know it's natural for that to be true in a big open source project like this, but it can be frustrating when you want to get something done that you know you need all hands on deck um, in order to get it moving. We're you know we're working on it. We're getting better at it, but it's still frustrating at times.
Yeah, I think I wholeheartedly agree with both those statements. First, Koa's got a rich history. The code base is massive, so getting new people and getting some of us that have been around a while up to speed on particular areas 3 years later or another 5 years down the line is incredibly difficult at times. And the time between a submission to having testing to having quality assurance and it finally landing in end users' hands, and that those you're inevitably only going to spot the bugs once it's in in the end user's hands. That lead time can often be anything between 6 months and 2 years. And that's quite hard again for a developer to go back and realize, well, I wrote this feature, but I don't remember any of the code that I wrote 2 years ago. So that can be quite a challenge. As Owen said, I think the biggest challenge is getting us to all focus on the same things at the same time sometimes. So in recent years, we've done some work on the dashboards and tried to encourage people to use those a bit more. And we've shifted some of the processes from working from oldest bugs to newest bugs to lurking in the opposite. So working from the most recently touched list, in the hopes that that encourages less of a lead time and people can work whilst they're already in context. They've already been working on that piece. I mean, there's negatives and positives for both, because it means that if something's been stuck for a while, it inevitably gets more stuck because it drops down that list of not having been looked at for a while. One of the things I'm desperate to try and do is be a bit more of a leader in the community, talking to some of the bigger companies and some of the smaller companies and individuals to encourage more like a day a week spent on community time where you're trading your QA a bit more clearly. As Owen said, the companies have all got to pay their staff's their bills and their staff's salaries, etc. So inevitably there's going to be a certain level of you have to prioritize what's being paid for at that moment. But I think it's about persuading the purse holders as such that actually we do need to upstream things. If we don't manage to work together on things earlier in the process, it kind of ends up biting you a bit later. We've seen varying companies have different branched, not forks, but branches that they have to maintain for a while. And the longer you've got your branched version with custom code in it, the harder it gets to maintain it going forwards. So I think it's a learning lesson that everybody that starts to contribute has to go through, is to realize that actually it's worth a little bit more pain up front than it is a lot of pain at the end. But until you've gone through it a few times, it's quite difficult to sell that to people, especially those that aren't necessarily working on the code day to day. It's upgrade time 6 months, a year later, you think, oh, there's a whole load of things here I've not managed to catch someone about yet, and then it's much more difficult.
I completely agree with you, Martin. I think for us, sometimes what we've had recently a really big push with our customers for educating essentially on why sponsored upstreaming is the best approach, and especially like you say, when it comes to upgrade time, if they've got customizations or custom features, that's when the pain comes in. And so for new implementations, but also existing implementations, a big push about why sponsored upstreaming is such a good idea, how it's good for the community and for the library itself. Yeah, so sponsored upstreaming for if a customer comes along and says, I would like a particular feature, sometimes they might have very specific requirements in that. So as has been touched on before, we would talk to them and try and scope out this piece of work so that it's as general as possible, or so that other libraries in the Koha community can also benefit from it. And then what would happen is the library would fund us to write the feature and put it on Bugzilla, and so that other libraries benefit from it. So we always try and make things as general as absolutely possible, and then also as configurable as possible. So libraries, that specific library that is funding it, can customize it to how they want it to work for their library. So lots of education of libraries around why sponsored upstreaming is the best approach. And then for blockers, I think, like you said, Martin, the time it takes between when you attach a patch to Bugzilla for it to be tested and go through the QA process, etc., that can be a definite blocker. Also, even just with regards to how long it takes for it to be tested, by the time it might be tested by someone, it doesn't apply cleanly, and then it needs to be updated to work because the Koha code base has moved on. So that can be a definite blocker. And then also, as with anything, there is a danger always of scope creep where perfect is the enemy of the good, and trying to basically split enhancements down as small as they can be and just get small parts of functionality added to Koha rather than trying to do everything at once. We can split enhancements up into multiple different bug reports and get small bits added over time rather than having to get something absolutely perfect and all-encompassing right at the start. And that can be a way that we can just keep building and evolving Koha.
Yeah, and I think I'm certainly pro the QA process. I think it's generally working and keeping the code up to a reasonably high standard. But I can certainly feel the pain of um, the queues being high and the time it takes to go through sometimes. I think the piece that I always have to remind myself is, although some of my individual bugs might feel like they're taking a long time, if I look at the number of enhancements and features and bug fixes that have gone in with each release, that reminds me that actually Koa is an incredibly busy, fast-moving project. So I just have to take a step back sometimes and go, it's not as slow as I think it is. It's just I got 10 things in and there's another 50 things in this cycle. It's not that my queue is being ignored. It's just we're all looking, and there's a lot to do. So
Yeah, I think that's some good perspective, particularly on the user side. If you have a development you sponsored and you're just focused on that, it takes a while for it to move through and then become part of the code base. But there's a lot of things getting in, and the evolution is happening rapidly. Paul, any thoughts to add?
I think the community QA process is actually pretty awesome. I've learned a lot of things through QA from very experienced people, much more experienced than I am. And I think if you yourself are a developer, there's so much to gain, even if your patches get failed QA, because you either learn something about software engineering in general, or you learn something about Koha, and it's equally important. Because just because you're a great software engineer doesn't mean that you're a great Koha engineer. And well, yeah, sometimes it can be frustrating, but I don't want to repeat everything that has been said already. I think um I think I'm not in the best position to comment on this specific question because the things that I currently work on are sponsored, but it's like third-party integrations, and it's very hard to upstream stuff like that because it's nobody needs it except us, you know. But I try my best to lay the groundwork that makes my future job easier, and I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that is something that you need to do.
All right, let's move on to our next question. Or did you have something, Martin? I didn't want to cut you off.
no, I'm all good.
So a real key to, I think, this forum is this question, and that's how can non-developers best help you as the developers out, and how end users communicating their experience and needs with developers, how is that best done? Getting somebody writes some custom JavaScript. How do you get to that next stage where you're moving from doing that type of stuff to actually submitting patches, and then finding a balance between addressing system issues that are very important, but maybe are a little less flashy for staff and patron who want like the cool new functionality and less of the internal plumbing. fixed, that type of stuff.
I definitely the question about getting custom JS into the code resonates with me because front end is what I do for the most part. And I have a sense that there's a lot of stuff that people are doing because they have frustrations with the way Koha works, but they're putting a band-aid on it by doing some custom JavaScript. And I'm concerned that there's things out there that people are seeing that we need to address in Koha's code. But because they've fixed it for themselves, they don't have to worry about it anymore. It can be hard to articulate what you want in a bug report, and it can be hard to sort of guide that bug report through the whole process. Even if you're not doing the coding, it can be hard to communicate with developers about how you want it done or something like that. So yeah, I'm always worried that people are putting band-aids on things or just like living with things that they don't like and not ever telling anybody. Like I have that concern about my own staff that like they're just living with stuff. They're like, oh yeah, that never works. I'm just gonna ignore it because these things happen. Well, no, I want to know. Like, please tell me, because if there's something we can fix, we should try to fix it.
Yeah, I find that as well. The libraries that I work with, they will often, like, it's best when they migrate newly to our consortium, because then they actually remember what it was like to not work in Koha. So they're not like satisfied with things that are actually problematic for them, so they can give that feedback. But the longer they're on, the more they just get used to things working the way they work, and the less talkative they are about issues they face.
Yeah. So I actually encourage our developers to go and sit in on training regularly, because it means we get to actually see the customers and we get the questions asked live in front of us. When you're giving a bit of training and someone goes, why did you have to click that one twice? It usually gives a little alarm bell in a developer's mind of, why do you have to click that button twice? And would go then come back and try and fix things. So yeah, it kind of goes back slightly to the point of what things would you like to be developing that aren't funded? I quite often come back from conferences and trainings and things with a whole raft of a little list of things that would just make the life slightly easier for an end user, but they're not necessarily things that are easy to warrant funding for. Yeah, I do agree with Owen. Sometimes it's quite difficult to explain the problem you're having and make it clear, particularly as we've got a lot of developers from different countries with different first languages, and well, developers can be a bit geeky behind the scenes and don't necessarily know library terms, and librarians don't necessarily know the geeky coding terms that a developer knows. So it's building that bridge in the middle somewhere. I think that's where we're very lucky to have people like Owen and Lizette who can do a bit of translation for some of us non-librarian folk.
I actually have an anecdote because you just said that you attended training. I recently did as well because I know the Koha code base very well now, but I noticed that I do not know the Koha stuff interface very well from the what the end user sees, and I needed to fix that. I attended training, and in that training alone, which does not cover everything, I already had a 30 item list of things that might need to be submitted to Bugzilla because they were not perfect or had some minor issue that would just be solved it could just be solved in an easier way. So that's a note for developers: attend training. It's very helpful. And there's actually one other thing that I thought about. How many projects have like these templates for submitting issues. that's maybe something that we should do as well. Like have a template with all the points. What doesn't work? What do you want? What's the expected behavior? What's the actual behavior? And that maybe we should not make it required, but at least as helpful guidance to how to write a useful bug report, you know?
Yeah.
But definitely that kind of like what do you think it should be doing, or what would you like it to be doing versus what it's actually doing makes it a lot easier to track down like where the breakdown is happening or what kinds of enhancement is actually needed. So like that kind of information is really helpful. Also, if you like comment on a bug or put in information on a bug and there's more communication about it, even if you're like, I don't exactly understand what they're talking about, but it seems like they're moving this direction, which doesn't really fix my problem. Like commenting on it and saying like, I don't exactly understand, but it seems like this is what's happening. Um, because sometimes even those of us who have worked in libraries, um, we haven't worked in your library necessarily or in a library that does things the same way as you, and we might be just like totally bypassing something because it wasn't something that was explained or that we just didn't understand. And so just communicating like on the bug if something doesn't seem to be matching up to you, or in the Mattermost. And we're all in there.
We're generally a friendly bunch.
Yep.
Just to reiterate, the commenting on bugs, that will also shift things back up the top of the queue in the dashboards that I keep rattling on about. So a comment counts as activity and we'll go, oh, it's been touched, someone's interested in this. So it'll fly up the queue, and that helps filter. I mean, I think at times Bugzilla can be quite a challenge to navigate. There's just a lot of information in there. So one of the ways I think people could really help the developers is taking a look at those triage and documentation queues and helping wherever they can there. If you have an issue and you can find the bug that's related, popping a comment on there, or closing an issue if you find something, oh, that's doesn't exist anymore, that's fixed. That's fantastic for us, because I think a lot of us are feeling a little overloaded with the sheer numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like people have touched on already, attending training and also giving training sessions to end users is really helpful as a developer to get out of that developer bubble and understand the end user more. And I really enjoy giving trainings to librarians that are new to Koha. Either they're new librarians or they've come from another system, and it's really interesting to hear the questions. Yes, why does this work this way? Or on this other system we could do this, and then you can get ideas for new features or functionality within Koha. And I think some things that are really helpful for developers. So if you're requesting an enhancement in Bugzilla, for example, to let the community know what is the problem you're wanting to solve. So because often with Koha there's multiple ways of solving a problem. If people come along with a very prescribed, it should do X, Y, and Z, that may not actually be the best way to achieve the problem you're trying to solve. So basically outline, this is what the ideal outcome would be. And then oftentimes the developers can look, well, what's the best approach to achieve that outcome? So that's a really helpful thing. And then, of course, as has been touched on, having some kind of template within Bugzilla when you're reporting a problem to give as much information as possible. So how can you replicate a bug? Do you have screenshots that you can show of the bug occurring? Are there example URLs or something like that, to basically give the developers as much information as possible so they can quickly find where the problem is rather than having to ask lots of additional questions to clarify where's the issue. So as much information as possible from the start. And I think another thing that's really useful for helping developers is for end users or non-librarians to do things like, for example, if your library has an SQL report, to share that on the Koha wiki or with ManaKB, and basically also helping other librarians in the mailing list or in Mattermost. And the reason for that is it enables developers. So if we work at a support vendor company, if the users are helping each other or sharing information with each other, that's often freeing up library budgets for the support vendor. So they might have a list of enhancements they'd like to do. And because they've not spent all of that support budget on day to day, can you write this SQL report for us or something like that? Then that money is can be prioritized towards adding new features and enhancements to Koha, because the librarians themselves are helping each other and empowered to write the SQL reports themselves, write the serials numbering patterns themselves, and so on. So basically, empowering the librarians also helps the developers because we have more time and more budget from the libraries to add those new features to Koha.
As far as getting custom JavaScript into the code and like moving from making that jump, I just want to point out that koha-US has a special interest group, Baby Devs, that's for doing exactly that. We actually, at our meeting last month, Jason did his first patch, which needs some QA follow-up because we forgot that the link was in 2 places, not just one, and only fixed it in 1 place. But we work on like making sure that your Koha testing Docker works, on doing sign-offs on patches that you can't do in the sandboxes, because like you need to do running a cron job or something to make it work. And also trying to do kind of make that leap from, okay, here's how you did it in JavaScript, how can you do it in Perl? And actually the change that Jason made was like basically a 1-line change, but it was like 5 or 6 lines of JavaScript to make it work. So sometimes it's simpler, or not necessarily simpler because you have to know a lot more, but it's like a smaller amount of code sometimes to do it in Perl. And so, or to do custom JS, there is JS in Koha. So depending on what it is, maybe it's something that would be better to like add as an option that way. But that's something that we're working on, trying to help people make that move.
I'd love to see more discoverability of some of those things. So I think there's lots of people that are kind of reproducing the same little JavaScript snippets and reproducing the same reports and reproducing the same CSS. I'd love to see more ways for us to somehow get a hold of that and share it with each other. And then we can spot patterns of, oh, 10 people have done this. That should surely be a core submission. It's one of the reasons I keep kind of pushing the bandwagon if I want to see discoverable plugins, because I see those as a route for people to onboard more in a lighter weight fashion, in terms of there's not the same level of QA and assurance. You can submit, I'd like to see somewhere you can submit your cool little plugin somewhere that other libraries can jump on and go, actually, this is a really great idea, and then make a progress path to go, well, there's been 500 downloads of that plugin. It's obviously something that's actually worthwhile just being in the core product or being a sanctioned community maintained plugin, and have that as a route. I think we're not far off that, but I think there's still a little bit more work to do.
It just occurred to me, maybe it would be a good idea to actually move that from the wiki to an actual Git repository. Just because it's easier to grab that and you know, track
Mhm.
the track changes and so on. That might be an idea that we could easily implement.
Yeah.
Just as a thought.
There are things like Heya, which was a bit of an initiative from the BibLeap people, but it never quite took off and it never quite became uh, the vision that they had. And I think that was about the idea was to have more sort of shareable snippets that you can discover right there from inside Koha and download and grab. And it's a similar effect as where we're looking for building a bit of a plugin store to grab things from. So I have some plans at Hackfest to try and promote some of those a bit more, but I always have too many plans going into Hackfest. So
Two other ways that I think are really great for non-developers to help developers is if you can contribute to translations, that's extremely helpful, translating Koha, or yeah, adding content to the Koha wiki or the manual, or indeed just answering questions, jumping in and answering questions if you know the answer in the mailing lists again. Again, about freeing up the time of the developers to work on other things like adding new features.
Well, let's move on to our next question. This one, just want to look at, just discuss kind of longer term, what's on the horizon for development, things that are maybe not going to be in like the next release, but are being worked on. I would think like if we asked this question a year ago, like bookings would be a good example of that, something that was kind of a new feature that was being conceived and worked on. And then also a question of whether AI is on the horizon for incorporating that, as you know, we always hear daily about AI. How is that impacting future development?
so things we're working on. We're about to submit some changes or an enhancement to circulation to allow for quotas. So a user can have, so some libraries loan, but you have a contract at the beginning of the year that you're only allowed X number of loans within a year's period. So that sort of feature we're about to submit. We're continuing with Paul to do quite a lot of enhancements on bookings. So it's gone through kind of its first couple of phases. But as Alex said, it's much easier to start small and build. So we've definitely got the foundations there now, but I think there's still quite a lot of room for improvement and enhancements there. Paul can probably go into more detail of those. We've been working kind of closely together, so there's plenty more going on in that area. The big push that I'm seeing from mostly sponsored by Bywater and their partners. They're passing quite a lot of work our way because we've got a bigger development team these days. Is they've got kind of a power to the user initiative going on, and we're really enjoying working on that because it's kind of all encompassing in terms of moving things that are currently hidden away server side and making them more available to the system administrators and the librarian with the correct kind of superhero permissions, etc. So things like you can actually see your SIP connection settings and manipulate them yourselves rather than having to get in touch with your support company. But I mean, you can still get in touch with your support company, but it just gives you a little bit more power at the end user's hands. We're doing similar for single sign-on configurations. We've done a lot more recently on exposing EDI and the error logs and things like that in the user interface. So you can spot your issues before necessarily your support company spots them and spot how to help work through them. So a lot of exposing more to the users, exposing the notices queue more clearly to a librarian as well. That's quite a big power to the user piece. That's quite a big all-encompassing project. I like that one. There's lots of little threads to it. I've monopolized again. Over to someone else.
Yeah, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the power to the partners, power to the users. the nice thing about that is that it doesn't just help the end users, but also people doing support, either at the end user level, someone like Owen, or when I was at my library doing like some of the support before it goes to a ticket to support company, but also like the support staff not needing to like get into the cron job log or like the command line logs to be able to troubleshoot some of this stuff. And so that's also really helpful because that'll help free up like the developers' times and the systems folks to help with more of the like enhancements or the structural changes to help Koha run better. The other thing I want to talk about was that there's been a big push in ILL in the last year. And going forward, we're also working on currently Koha has the framework for being a borrowing entity, but not a lending entity like built in. And there's been a lot of discussion closer to when we had KohaCon, but I also have it on the Hackfest topics list of moving forward with like the framework for making Koha able to be the lending entity as well and have that work as well as the borrowing entity does. Right now, that kind of has to be done from within like the plugin that you're using for a backend, but especially with the standard backend now in Koha, that's going to be a great thing once we can get it off the ground.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see those developments freeing up, giving more information to the users, and also helping, like you said, Lizette, about helping the support teams, also giving more information to the end users so that they can, if they want to, give that information to the support teams, enables quicker resolution of the problems, diagnose and find and fix the problems quicker. I think some of the things that we're really excited about seeing that are on the horizon for development or in progress now. So one of them is the whole catalog concerns feature that has been worked on over the last few releases. Some of our users and customers are really interested in seeing how it's essentially turning Koha into a ticket management system, or giving some aspects of ticket management systems where someone can log a job or a task and then allocate it out to another member of the library team, and then you can add statuses and comments to say how the progress on resolving a problem or looking at something, how that's going, and then mark it as finished. How that's going to be so helpful also, not just for allocating tasks out between librarians, but also one of our libraries mentioned how it'd be great for upskilling new staff. So a library could, for example, say, give a new member of staff, could you go and catalogue a book, and then make a ticket for that, or make a catalogue concern job for that, allocate that to that member of staff, they can go and do it. Then they could say, could you come along and check this? And then the person that's training them or upskilling them can go and check that. So you can really use that whole feature for both upskilling and training within a library, as well as dishing out different library jobs to people in the library. And another feature that my colleague Alicia has been working on that we're really excited about getting upstreamed into Koha is the staff side recalls functionality, to enable recalls to happen on the staff interface as well as the OPAC. That's something that we're really keen to see be added, and we think would be really helpful for other libraries.
Makes me really excited hearing that you're excited by some of the same things we are. So it's great. I'm loving doing the catalog concerns ticket stuff. That's exactly where I'd love to take it, is merging some of the existing features into a more encompassing workflow management ticketing system. Looking for funding for that one. At the moment, it's a bit of a passion project for me. So progress is happening, but slowly. Yeah, I'm generally quite excited. the interlibrary loans coming up as well. That's another one we've got our mitts in. We're doing a lot. Sorry, very British colloquialism there. Yeah, we're doing a lot in the ILL space, and it's a very sort of exciting area.
One other thing I just wanted to jump in about that Lizette raised, I think something that we've talked about with a lot of libraries as well recently is using Koha for cataloging lots of different, not necessarily traditional library things. So, for example, it might be using Koha to catalog films, or it might be using Koha. So we have some libraries that use Koha for cataloging toys or bikes or chairs or all sorts of different things, and then they lend those out. So using Koha and adding more functionality to Koha to make it essentially a thing that you can store any kind of record type, I guess, and then it's not just for traditional library workflows. You could use it for all sorts of novel and interesting things and educating organizations that it doesn't just have to be for cataloging books and electronic resources. You could basically, it's a big database that you can use to store any kind of thing in.
I do want to move on to make sure we have time for attendees to ask questions. And
I just one point about
oh,
AI.
please, Paul.
Because no one picked up AI. I think it could actually be very beneficial to Koa to at least allow AI integration via plugins. I don't want AI in Koa, never. But there is this great tool which is called Olama or Oyama or whatever you want to call it, and it's basically like a Docker CLI for open source large language models. And I've started to work on a plugin that plugs Olama right into the stuff interface, and I haven't made that much progress yet, but it's something that I am considering, and I want to, like, if it has reached a state where it is usable, like, to experiment to give like to the community to experiment with AI and integrating into search or whatever, you know. And I'm really thankful to Martin that you provide a lot of the building blocks to a lot of these more abstract things that will not relate to AI, but in general, like these abstract building blocks that make building large parts of Koa much easier. And that's something I'd like to see more of if you have the time to spare.
Koa is all about standing on the shoulders of giants. I stand on
True.
the shoulders beneath me or behind me just as much. There's loads of good code and good examples out there. Sometimes too many, in fact. Sorry.
No,
That's
that's quite right. It's actually your turn to ask some users here if you have any questions as developers. Can open that up and people can either unmute or respond in the chat. So, do any of the developers have any questions for users?
Just to jump in real fast, I'm gonna end this poll and push the results out, so that'll show you like sort of the who's here and how people feel about themselves. That we started at the start. So hopefully you should be able to see sort of the breakdown of who you're talking to.
I guess we shouldn't be surprised that a lot of us, we could answer more than one, right? Or did you have to pick just one, Jason?
No, yeah, you had the option to pick as many as you wanted.
Okay. So systems administrators, the ones who have been curious, the most curious about how to speak developer. Shouldn't be surprising at all.
I have a
Well,
question. Oh, which is
Nope.
how many of you are on the Mattermost?
I raised my hand.
Because that's a great place to discuss like what lots of discussion happens there, and sometimes there'll be people asking about like, hey, I'm working on this. I need some feedback. but it can also be a good way to be like, hey, I just filed this bug and I think it's a big deal. Can we talk about it? Because I also know that sometimes I've seen that and people will come up with a solution where they don't need a development necessarily, where like maybe it's a workflow issue or something. So just I highly recommend being involved on the Mattermost. And it does seem like many of you are. So yay.
It is a
Yay.
bit of a fire hose. So if people are saying they've tried it and maybe stepped away from it, yeah, it takes a minute to get used to the speed at which the conversation goes. So I hear you if that's what you're thinking too. But after dipping back in a few times, it's gotten easier for me to figure out, you know.
And you don't have to drink all the water. You can
Yes.
dip in and dip out.
Yep.
Yeah. The threaded conversations are quite useful for that. So if there's a topic you're particularly interested in, you can click the kind of reply to topic or reply to message button, and it will thread it out into a slightly less scary full screen. So, yeah, let's make streams out of that river.
Any other questions before we turn it over to attendees?
I don't
Well,
really have a question, but I did want to make a comment that that I really want people to speak up if they don't find the community experience friendly, because developers, we can get, stuck in our own world, and we can be short when we should be, more gentle. And none of us want that to be the experience for the end users. And so
No.
if you encounter friction, please say something. If you want to DM me on Mattermost, I'd be happy to hear that feedback, because we want everybody to feel like they can communicate with us and have their needs heard.
Yeah, I'd completely echo that. I think it's also worth remembering that the Mattermost is a really international platform. So there's quite a lot of people who English is their second or third language. And I know some can come across more abrasive than others, and actually you meet them in person and they're a lovely huggy person. It's just they haven't quite got the same communication experience as others have. So it's just we're a big mixed bag of people. But generally, I think everybody that I've worked with in Koa is really lovely, genuine person. So it's a friendly place.
Paul, you had something?
Yeah, I have to shadow that. It should always be a friendly place. And Mattermost as the community in general, that's no brainer to me. I hope I'm not guilty of that myself, but I think I'm doing a good job most of the time. I actually had written down a question that we already touched on, but maybe someone wants to answer directly. This what could be also we discussed it already, like how does the bug reporting flow work for you? If not, why? If yeah, what could be improved? That's what my question was. But as we already discussed, I don't know if someone wants to say something. I'd love to hear it, but
Well, I can at least speak for myself. The big friction I see with getting more involved with this is just a matter of time. And then that seems like there's enough you have to learn to get to from the level where I'm at, which is sometimes commenting on bugs, uh, you know, doing development specs and working with usually Bywater with that, and going the next step of actually like submitting a patch like Jason did, that the amount of time to get there, and even if resources were abundant and easy to grab, it just seems like it's just that time is not going to appear. So that makes it a little difficult to say, developers, it's on you to find time in my schedule. That's not really your job, but that's just me.
Do you think things like we used to do more kind of community action days? So used to have bug squashing days semi-frequently, like once every few months and things. Do you think bringing some of those back would help? I think a lot of those dried up just because the people that were trying to organize them and orchestrate them also ran out of time. But is it easier for people to put a date in the diary and say, right, I'm gonna have a day to play in the sandbox and learn some things, rather than trying to squeeze pieces in here and there? I know personally my timelines are always full, but I'll always try and make time if someone catches me. But it might be easier if there was a date.
Yeah, I think it's worth exploring. I know the first one of those I was at, my eyes kind of glazed over a bit, and I wasn't quite there yet, um, but I think that sort of thing, if I were doing that type of thing a little bit more regularly, and I wasn't like spacing it out over years and then forgetting everything I did the last time, I know that would personally make me feel a little bit more confident in doing that type of work. Christy, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just gonna, this is a little bit jumping ahead in the bug workflow to the QA point. I would like to see more ability to use the sandboxes. I feel like I was doing really great signing off on some bugs, and then recently I've been trying to spin up sandboxes and not been able to get them to open for the patch that I'm trying to sign off on. And I am not in a position to be able to download Koha testing doc right now. So I feel a little stuck, and like I would love to do a bug squashing day if I could get in and spin up some sandboxes. That's all.
I wholeheartedly feel you there. We maintain one of the big sandbox instances, and it's quite a challenge just keeping on top of it and keeping up. So I totally understand the annoyance of it being down, and then the annoyance of an email landing in my inbox going, the sandboxes are down, and me thinking, how am I going to fit in fixing that? So yeah, I think we need to somehow, that's one of the things that I'd like to see moved into more of a foundational entity, so that there's more clear responsibility for maintaining some of those pieces of infrastructure. I think there's a few too many things in the Koa project that are perhaps too donationary, so they're too donated and relying on just the good hearts and goodwill of either individuals or companies. So there's a bunch of companies that are, I mean, all the three sandbox systems are run by PTFS, BibLeap, and Bywater, and I think all three of us, they're something we really want to maintain, but we really struggle to put the effort into to keep going.
I also know that Kyle has a list of some things he'd like to add to the sandboxes when he's done with what he's doing right now. That would, some of those things that right now means you have to download Koha testing Docker to test, like some of the cron job running and things like that, and try and get more of that into somewhere that you could do it in the sandboxes, so you don't have that limitation if you're not trying to do development. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, Bob, is that you should come to Baby Devs, because then we can make you spin up your Koha testing Docker at least once a month. And if nothing else, make sure that your KTD is working. That's something that like I tried to do myself when I was a library staff member who was wanting to do a little bit of development. And if I had had something on the calendar like once a month, I'm going to make sure that it works. Yes, KTD is Koha testing Docker. Thank you, Heather, for asking in the chat. And because what happened is I'd go like 4 months, and then my at the time it was DevBox, Koha DevBox pre-testing Docker would be broken again. And I would have to spend like all the time I had to possibly work on a development or on testing trying to fix it. And so
Yeah.
that's fair. You could always just have you could do your bring your KTD up, make sure it works, and like the day before, and then you could email the list and say, I'm having this problem, or I need a bug to work on, or something.
And something that we've found is when we have for forums like this where different Koha end users come together and talk about Koha. So we've done a few user days in New Zealand of some of our different Koha libraries, and it's great to hear from the Koha users for them to be able to talk about, well, how do you use Koha? Or what would your library like to see added to Koha? That's really useful for us to hear. I think we've also done some trainings around things like for end users, SQL, how to write an SQL report within Koha or write some HTML or CSS or JavaScript. And it'd be good to hear from people about what kind of resources do you find useful for learning or for doing things like SQL reports? What do other Koha end users, what do librarians, if they're wanting to, for example, look at doing an SQL report, are you going to the SQL wiki? Are you going to, if you want to learn more about SQL, are you going to W3 Schools? It's interesting for us to hear where, or is it just a complete blocker for you? It would be really good to hear from people where they go if they want to, for example, write an SQL report or add some HTML or something like that to their Koha OPAC. It's interesting for us to see where the resources people look are.
That's true. That will be very interesting.
At this point, we've got a little bit over 10 minutes left, and this can just kind of evolve more into a conversation. We're getting a lot of comments in the chat. You can continue to ask questions or bring things up there, or you can raise your hand, and then we'll have you unmute and you can ask there. But I didn't want to cut off any of the developers from talking. Keep going, but we'll spend the rest of the time kind of peppering you with questions as we close out.
And I just wanted to point out that I believe, Jason, have a koha-US SQL resource guide
Yep.
on the website.
I can put the link in.
And that has some good like Koha specific tips for reports.
Did people see the ChatGPT driven Koha report builder helper thing that one of the Bibli people have been doing? I'm trying to find the link in
Yeah, it's
Mattermost.
Arthur's world.
Yeah.
It's like the
Arthur.
Arthur, oui. It's an agent. What's it called? I think I have a link. One sec.
Eric just put it in the chat.
Awesome.
The Koha report exists.
That's pretty cool. That's one of the ways AI can start to be helpful. It's still outside of Koha, but I believe he's fed it the Koha schemas, so it kind of knows a little bit about how Koha's reports should be built. So I think it's been fed the schema and fed the reports library, so it should come up with fairly accurate, half decent SQL, at least a good starting place.
Since we're talking about SQL a little bit, I'm just curious how far, if you can like be somewhat competent at writing an SQL report, how big a gulf is there between that and actually writing a patch?
Good question. They're quite different. Yeah, they're fairly different kind of skills, I think. I mean, they're not different skills. You're still doing the logical thinking, but the languages are quite different, and the foundations of what's available within the Koha system are quite different. So most of the modern code base is using an object-oriented object system, so you kind of need to know some of that. Basic patches would be quite easy still, I think.
I think
But
that the notices, template toolkit notices and slips is probably a better comparison because
yes,
that's using Perl. It's some of the stuff that you do in notices and slips is basically just the same thing you might do in a patch, where you're like calling the Perl object, like Martin talked about. And that's something that really needs more documentation as we're moving into more of the defaults being there.
I mean that's something I think we're quite guilty of as a community. We're not very good as developers. I don't think any developers are great at documentation. I'm yet to meet one, but we could really do with documenting more of our processes in terms of the actual code and best practice. I think that's one of the reasons people find it quite difficult to get onboarded. And I hope I'm not scary, but I think there's some of us that have been around for a while can, just by the fact we've been around a while, be quite scary to approach. Again, pushing for the come talk to us. We're generally friendly people, but don't get scared by the fact that my name's been there for a few years. I'm still just as much of a noob at times.
So I mentioned in chat that koha-US has done. We did at least 2 or 3 very basic jQuery. I think we did very, very basic jQuery and then very basic jQuery, and we did very basic SQL. And Jason and Christopher did a SQL training. And one of the issues is always though is that we do those, and then there's always new people. So I'm thinking it might be the kind of thing that needs to be done more often by koha-US, but that is something that we've done, and we sent out invites all around the world, and we didn't have a huge turnout is one of the issues too. That was one of the things that, I think I did very, very basic jQuery twice. And the second one was slightly better attended than the first one, but it was a lot of the same people that had been to the first one. So I think that's maybe something that koha-US could address more too, is maybe not just thinking of these as one-time events, but thinking of them as like an annual event or a semi-annual event, because there are always new people.
So I've been trying to keep up with the questions in chat. It seems like you guys have been giving really good answers within the chat. I did have one on the side if you guys want to answer that. Somebody asked just generally what makes a good Koha engineer or developer? What makes you good at your job?
I think that one of aside from all the code writing, one of the things that makes a good Koha developer is the ability to work with other people, to compromise, and to see your patch through the whole process. Because
Mm.
it's one thing to just write a patch, submit it, and then walk away. Like that may or may not go anywhere from there. Like you're depending on somebody else to take it through that whole process. If you can be there to keep the patch up to date and fix the QA issues that are raised, you really need to be there for the whole process and right up until the moment that it's released, and then hopefully to be around to fix bugs that come after.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's not just like a one-time send that patch in and then walk away and expect it to be magically included.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I really kind of instill in all of the developers that join our company is being reactive and not dropping your bugs is hugely important. Things aren't going to magically go through the process overnight, but if you can spot when someone's got interested in your bug, added a comment, done a test, looked at QAing it, if you can react quite quickly, you're much more likely to catch them when they're able to come straight back to it whilst they've got this. It's that whole context switching thing. So yeah, being reactive and friendly, and not being scared to have a go. Like we've all been there at some point and made silly mistakes. We've also all been there and said, I'm still learning from new developers coming along, which is great, and I love to see that. There's no such thing as a terrible idea. You might have a few people come and question it, but that's part of the good thing, is having that debate and pushing us forward. I think examples of where questions have been asked and then the answer's been different 2 years later is, well, we've now got a really good foundation of using Vue.js, so a new JavaScript framework in the front end of Koha. Well, we've kind of gone through that debate 2 or 3 times, and now we're there. We've made that. It's never a silly question to ask, how can we improve this?
That's really
Okay, I'm
good.
going to try to. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay! I'm just over here. So we are at 2 minutes before our closing time. I just want to thank you all. I mean, obviously, I wrote down that I would say thank you for this amazing conversation, but from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for this amazing conversation. It's this also just a reminder that this has been recorded. It will be available on the koha-US YouTube channel. The chat is amazing. If you can never remember how to save the chat, what you do is you go into the chat window and you click on the 3 dots at the top right of the chat window and you select Save Chat. Depends on your computer where it's going to save it, but at least it will be there and you won't be scared. And I'm pretty sure that the way that it will work with the YouTube is the chat will also be there, I think. But one more thing about the after times. If you'd like to give immediate feedback about this program, you can feel free to email the education committee at education@koha-us.org, which I'm pretty sure I typed yes. It is there on the slide. And we have a poll, I think, that was also, if you'd like to stick around and provide immediate feedback, you're welcome to do that. Is that how that works, Jason?
Yep, so I'm gonna launch
Yes.
this poll. You can fill it out now. We've
Okay.
also got it in Google form format, which I've got a link. I'll put in the chat if you don't want to stick around and fill it out, but we'll launch it right now. So
And so if you're interested in attending another event where you have a chance to get to know counterparts on the other side of the development divide, feel free to say that in the chat as well. And this is amazing. Thank you all. I think we've done a really great job of showing what Koha is meant to be, from all over the globe, multiple time zones. Everybody showed up, and there have been up to 40 people in this room doing exactly what we came here to do. This is really fantastic. Thank you again on behalf of the Education Committee and all of Koha-US. Have a great day.